Alright, so we're going to take a break from all the robot stuff and we're going to make a little Firefly, and we'll use that throughout the whole scene. We just need to make one of them. So the way I'd start this is we're going to just take a really basic shape and start morphing the body, or pushing around this little sphere until we get something that looks like a Firefly body. And there's a couple fireflies in this image that I could look at for reference, but essentially I just want to make sure that even though this shape is very simple, I want to make sure it's very obvious, like where the head is and where the butt is, and that there's like a gesture that feels like this is some sort of shape and not just, a coffee bean, a flying coffee bean or something like that. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm inserting a flat plane on the side, and we're going to use that to start making our wing. I just divided it once so that I would have a little bit of topology to work with. And now what I'm doing is I'm inserting edges, and then we're going to stitch here at the top these two corners, and what that'll do is when we smooth it, we'll get a round corner instead of these sharp edges. And now that we have a decent shape, I'll go ahead and add thickness and start placing it onto the body and rotating it into place. And now when we're happy with the body and the wings, we'll go ahead and merge those together. And now that we have our base Firefly, we can use it to create the swarm that sits inside the chest. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use Nanomesh. And so the first thing we have to do is create kind of the base shape that represents the overall swarm. And then what we can do is we can populate that shape multiple times with the Firefly that we have. So let's go ahead and put that into place. And once you're happy with the placement, we'll go ahead and go back to our Firefly and turn that into an insert mesh. And we'll want to go ahead and do that on the Z-Modeler tool. And so now with Z-Modeler selected and our insert mesh being the Firefly, we can go to Z-Modeler, hover over face, insert mesh, and do island. And that'll put a Firefly on every single face of our mesh. And then from here we can scroll down to Nanomesh, and you'll see that we have all these options. The most important one is the one I'm editing right now, distribution, and that'll give you a random distribution so it's not as uniform as it was before, but there's all kinds of options here, how deep you want it to be inside the shape, the rotation of it, all that good stuff. And then when you're happy with it, you can kind of hand rotate one or two here or there and kind of give it that artistic touch if you'd like. And once you're happy, you can go ahead and go to Geometry and press Convert BPR to Geo. While you're working on the Nanomesh, that was just a preview. If you want to make it into actual geometry, you'll have to press that button. And you will notice that it did give it its own polygroup. So just go ahead and go to Split, Group Split if you want to edit that separately. And this is the part where you could do your own kind of editing. You can rotate individual ones. In this situation, I kind of wanted to make a few that looked like they were leaving, they were going in different directions, because I wanted to get that feel of movement in the piece. Alright, so if you look, the front of the shoulders have these kind of screw tops to them that have the strike that goes horizontally through it. And the best way to make this, I think, is to take this initialized sphere, and then if we bevel right down the middle, it'll create the avenue for this. And then we make sure we polygroup just these top ones. And if we extrude them down, and if we mask this, isolate it, and then use our gizmo and then just pull up on that y-axis, you can kind of see where we're going here, but we're essentially just making that initial shape. This is definitely a unique shape. It's something that you just kind of have to learn how to make. I can't really explain that any better other than this is just one of those things that is going to be, it's just a very strange shape. It's hard to kind of make it work, but this is how you do it. Okay, I think I am pretty happy with that, so we're going to go ahead and place that inside of the shoulder. And then once it's placed, making sure that of course we add that like nice rotation that we see in the concept. And there we go. Okay, so the elbow needs that cylinder that it rotates around, that the forearm rotates with. It's really simple, as you probably can imagine, but I just wanted to make sure that I had it on here. I didn't gloss over it just in case. Placing it using the gizmo to decide how thin it should be, moving it around, and of course adding the edge loops so that when we smooth it, it looks good and sharp. On the sides here we don't have an edge loop, so we inset the face and create kind of like a similar situation. Okay, so the shoulder has a joint, the elbow has a joint, and now it's time to create the joint for the hand. To me, this looks like this initialized sphere that we usually start with, but it looks like one side would be flattened since it's kind of like toward the inside of the hand maybe, and then the outside has a bit of a bevel and an extrude in. So the first thing we'll do is mask off half and then scale it in so that it flattens. And then we'll do our split vert here. And then extrude. But this top part is rounded and I want it to be flat. So if I isolate it, mask it, reverse the mask, and then pull up on the y-axis, we can flatten that out. And then we can do our insets and extrudes. And that middle part doesn't have an edge loop, so whenever you want to add an edge loop somewhere, but there isn't, if you added an edge loop onto that kind of square at the bottom, it would kind of just go off to the left and right. It wouldn't circle around. So if you want to do that, all you have to do is polygroup that whole flat area, and then inset the polygroup. So one downside to this type of shape that doesn't have the poles is that it's not perfectly circular. So what I like to do, and I think I've done once or twice on here, is to mask off the edges, invert, and then just pull on the gizmo here, and we can kind of like hand make it circular. I think it works out pretty well because there isn't too much geometry here, so it's not crazy. Then maybe add a few edge loops just to make sure that everything looks nice and sharp. Now that we're happy with the shape, it's time to go ahead and place it. With this kind of stuff, you really need to trust the process. Initially, you have just a bunch of floating parts, and that can make it kind of difficult to see that this is going to work out at the end. But once you start putting in those joints and connecting things, and they're not just floating bits, it really comes together nicely. And that just about does it. So let's go ahead and move on to the next piece. So let's take a look at the upper part of the leg here. There looks like there's a gold trim. So what we'll do is we'll reutilize the same topology that's there. So let's duplicate that leg, polygroup the flat island, and then delete whatever topology is left. And then from here we really just need that strip of geometry. So let's polygroup that and then delete whatever's left over. And now let's go ahead and give this an extrude. Smooth it to see what it looks like. I think I want the top to stay smooth, but the bottom needs to be sharper, so we'll just extrude polyloop. And let's go ahead and grab that color so we can see the difference. Right now, to me, they look a little too flush. It almost feels like they're the same object. So what we can do is bring that gizmo to the center and scale it in. And now that that's there, we're going to go ahead and borrow the geometry from that elbow joint, and we're going to reutilize it as the kind of cylinder that connects the two legs. And then once that's in place, we'll grab the color, fill object, do a little bit of resizing, and that's it really. This cylinder, there's not much here else I can do. I think in this case we would just leave it as is. Now we're going to double back and we're going to go into this cylinder here and add kind of some of the details that we see there. I'm going to go ahead and delete, split the center vert and delete what we see there. And then we're going to bridge hole across. Okay, that way we can actually create kind of the illusion that this is an actual working thing and the pincers can sit inside of there. There we go, or whatever that is, I'm not sure. I'm just calling them pincers for now. And then making sure everything fits inside of there well. Looks good to me. And then once that's all good to go, we can add some of the more specific trim that we see on the cylinder. Made sure to delete the creases that were added because of the bridge, and we'll add our own edge loops in. So I added an edge loop and now I'm doing a bevel, and then what we can do is just extrude this bevel down and it'll create a little valley here, and that looks pretty good. And then it looks to me like this kind of end part actually sticks out a little bit more, so we're going to inset or extrude in the inner part of this tube, and then we'll add some edge loops so that we can fortify the shape so they don't kind of melt when we smooth them down. There we go. Started from a very simple cylinder, and a couple steps in we have something that looks much more kind of complex and well thought out than what we had before. And then looking back at this, it looks like maybe that edge would be smooth, and it gives a little more more of a complicated feature instead of just making everything extremely tight. On to the next. Okay, so more smaller details. We have the knuckles. So we're going to go ahead and start with the basic cylinder. Initializing from a star. And it looks like to me that if we inset here and extrude, we will get something close to the shape that's seen there. It is very small, it's kind of sketchy, but that's kind of the look I'm seeing. And it's not a perfect circle, so go ahead and shrink that down or squeeze it. And definitely not this thick. So let's delete this edge loop, and then we can mask out this bottom face and push it in. And once we're happy with the shape, we're going to go ahead and place it. And once it's placed too, we'll also have a better idea because we'll be able to compare it with all the other parts around it. So I realized that kind of that center piece needed to be pulled in a little bit more. Then once the initial one is done, we can start placing the other ones. Okay, and that is looking pretty good. Just doing some final adjustments. Making sure that we're not accidentally penetrating through the fingers or the hand. And there we go. So one little trick I like to do is if I don't feel like texturing and painting textures, what I can do is if there's an area that's a different color and the geometry underneath matches it, I can just kind of duplicate that shape and delete everything except for where the light or the different color is. So in this instance, the collar is kind of like emitting that glow from the inside. These seems to be like little portholes. So if we delete everything else and just keep these polygons, we can color them yellow and then offset them just a little bit, and we'll get that color variation without having to go in and UV everything. And then all we have to make sure to do is that we have our supporting edge loops so that, as you saw, it doesn't shrink down. So there's one. Two, and one more. And then as you can see, the faces are still sitting exactly where the other ones are, so you won't be able to see any difference. But once we offset them, you'll see that the color starts to come through. And voila! Now we have that light sticking through. And then I also cut out this hole in the back here for the fireflies to come out of, and this is the same situation. We'll duplicate, delete everything but that flat island there on the bottom, and then that'll be kind of like our light source of where all the fireflies are coming from. And let's jump down to the foot here, and we're going to make that small band that's kind of sitting around the foot. This is another situation where this probably could have been in texture, but I think it would also look good if it was something that was sitting off of the surface. And in this situation, we don't quite have really nice topology here to just pull from, but we can start from what we have there. So I've found this kind of poly loop that was inside of the foot, and it's not perfect, but we could definitely use it. So one way to do that is to kind of delete some of the edge loops that are there and then bring them back in, and once we bring them back in, they'll be a lot cleaner. And now I'm using the slice curve here, which would put a perfect slice right through the geometry, and what I can do here is isolate kind of the good parts of the geo that I want that are left, and then delete whatever is left over. Then I went ahead and did a deformation deflate, and that made it so that it would kind of sit outside of the shape. And then if we do an extrude, kind of getting a better idea of what we're working with, and then just push things around with the move brush to get it to fit in properly. It's looking a little uneven here. I kind of want it to be like this perfect strip of geometry that's going through the foot. So we'll go ahead and mask that off and rotate it into place. Then of course add our supporting edge loops. Grab our color from one of the other gold pieces. I really just want to make sure that everything is flush and nothing is floating or has any weird gaps, because that'll kind of give away, or that I should say that is kind of what makes it feel finished, clean, and well done. Alright, so we're going to steal this elbow joint one more time, and we're going to bring it down to where the ankle joint is. And we'll make sure it's fit, and once it's fit, we'll go ahead and do any adjustments we need to make it look more like it feels and fits with the concept. And the one thing I noticed is that it kind of tapers from the base to the top. So what we can do here is inset, and if we delete the outside edge loops, the shape will kind of fall into that tapered shape on its own. It does not look like a perfect cylinder, so I went ahead and scaled that just in the z-axis. Add in some edge loops. And that top part is looking a little bit flat to me, so I think maybe what we could do is inset those faces on the top there. And then once we do that, it should be perfect. Great. And this might seem obvious, but if we take the ankle pieces and duplicate them, we can go ahead and make the back side of the foot here. So go ahead and unlock our gizmo and then press that third mark there and it'll put it right in the middle of our shape. And then holding shift, we can rotate and snap it into 90 degrees so it goes perfectly straight. Delete that front part and we're left with the piece that we want. And this looks a little bit different, but really to me it's just kind of a stretched, flattened cylinder that we can just put in the back here. And with the gizmo on the bottom, we can pull on that red tab and it'll only scale it in the z-axis. And that looks good to me. That sounds about right. It depends how you look at that. I guess it could be a square shape in the back there too, but because in the concept it's so loose, we can really do anything. Alright, so I think we have one last piece here to make, and then we'll have all the pieces to our character and we can start doing the finishing touches. And that last piece is one more joint, kind of like the one we made for the shoulder, but the shoulder one we cut it up. And so we're going to take our time and make a really nice one because it's going to be in not only our wrists but also our ankles. So if you remember, we went ahead and used a 3D sphere and went to initialize and kind of chose how many polygons that we wanted. You want to make sure you make Polymesh 3D or else you won't be able to edit it. And then we append it back into our scene. And again, this shape is essentially a ball joint with a cylinder coming out of it, and that sphere is kind of sitting inside of its own cage and it rotates inside of that cage, or at least that's what it looks like. And that's also kind of how toys work if you've ever worked in toys. And since I'm extruding the cylinder out from the top, I want to make sure that what I'm extruding from is flat, or else it would kind of splay out and extrude in different directions. And then as you can see, if we smooth it, it gets kind of gross. So let's go ahead and add in those edge loops to make sure that it looks good. And there we go. There is our finished piece. We just need to make sure we add the color back in at some point. And we can start placing them within the ankle and the wrist. So now placing that here in the wrist, you can see that like initially this kind of looked like nothing. It was just some floating shapes, but very quickly this looks like a machine once you add a couple joints and some kind of moving parts, if you will. And naturally, we're just going to go ahead and use that same exact ball joint, and we're going to be putting it inside of the ankle. And after this, we'll be done. We'll have all the pieces we need, and we can move on to the finishing touches, polishing everything, making sure everything looks nice and clean. Not only that, but posing and kind of making this look like a finished piece and wrapping this up.